JC, what's good? It is wild card week in the NFL. How are you feeling, my man?
I'm feeling great. We get not just 3 days of incredible football ahead of us, but we get 5 days when you look at postseason football in the college football landscape and the NFL landscape. I'm here for it. Let's go.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. This is going to be a really exciting semifinal round. At least one of the games is going to be exciting. We'll get to that in a second. I'm not so sure about the other. And then we're going to have some really great wild card football. I think, as we've been discussing for weeks, the AFC is more wide open than I can remember it. There is no Lamar Jackson as Baltimore lost to the Steelers on that last second field goal. The ghost of Justin Tucker comes back to haunt them. But yeah, no Lamar Jackson, no Patrick Mahomes, no Joe Burrow. Josh Allen has a bum foot. So, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the AFC picture. And then, of course, it is a bloodbath right now in the NFL with a lot of coaches losing their job, including the biggest name to hit the market, John Harbaugh, after 18 years with the Ravens. He's out in Baltimore. And now the question goes to, where's he going to land? Because apparently he's already heard from 7 teams. We'll talk about that. There are 7 openings, including Baltimore. 7 teams. If it's not his own team courting him, means there's a mystery 8th potentially.
And you're telling me that Ozzie Newsome wasn't immediately feeling regrets from that breakup and was trying to get him back on the line?
Right. Like, I want you back. But the prediction markets point us in a certain direction. But before we get to all of that, let's talk about the college football playoff, and let's start with Miami and Ole Miss. It sounds like Ole Miss is not going to have all of their coaches back, but they are going to have most of their coaches back. And John, I was feeling really bad for Ole Miss going into this playoff. Feeling like, how ridiculous is it that this system that we have set up with all of the money and all the intelligent people that are in the athletics departments, much less at these prestigious institutions working in other departments that could have a voice and like, hey, maybe there's a better way to set up this organization. I was really feeling bad for Ole Miss because they were going to be missing a bunch of their coaches, including Lane Kiffin. But then we get the news today, and we're going to talk about this more, that Jordan Davison is not going to be able to play going forward for the Ducks at running back. He's got a broken clavicle, and I thought, oh, well, at least we've got Jaden Lamar. And then later in the article, I was reminded that Jaden Lamar entered the transfer portal. So he actually, even though he played in the quarterfinal, he's not going to be available in the semifinals, or should the Ducks get past Indiana, the finals. And, weirdly, it made me feel less bad about what's happening at Ole Miss, because look at what's happening at Oregon. This system is screwing everybody. Now, Ole Miss and Trinidad Chambliss and the Ole Miss offense, I think they've got a great shot against Miami. That Miami defense is really nasty, and they're really fast, and Miami has done enough on offense. I don't think Miami's necessarily destined to lose this game, but nor do I think Ole Miss is either. I think the question is going to be, have they looked at enough tape from Texas A&M and then from last week when Miami sprang the big upset on Ohio State to understand how they're going to handle Reuben Bain Jr. Because he was the game wrecker, and you see this in the NFL too. There's a reason why the top 20 contracts in the NFL are all quarterbacks, with like 2 exceptions: edge rushers. Because edge rushers, like a quarterback on offense, can wreck a game on defense, and Reuben Bain Jr. can do that. Do you think Ole Miss is going to be prepared to protect the quarterback and give Chambliss enough time to make plays?
You can't poo-poo anybody who beats this A&M team that we watched march through the regular season, with 1 loss, and then turn around and beat Ohio State. And bye teams, now that we've added the buy-in, are 1-7. And yes, the bye rust is real. And you even did see that in Indiana, although they shook that rust off after a quarter, where most
They
of the
were
bye
also
teams, it took
so much
a half.
better than Bama.
There's definitely that too. But Ohio State is a very, very good football team. And Miami was able to dominate that game very early on and then kept that domination all throughout. So I think it's one of those things where Miami has proven that they should have been here. Miami has silenced any doubters that were around that said Notre Dame should have been there instead of them. And they very well could march their way right on to the national championship game. Trinidad Chambliss played a lights out game against Georgia, especially in that third and fourth quarter to get them past. But he also had a game that reminded me a lot of like college football Johnny Manziel, running around the field, extending plays, doing these things that just seemed like miracle after miracle after miracle. And when you've got an edge rusher that can own a game like that, it makes it very difficult. I mean, you look at all the games that the Browns won this year that they shouldn't have won because of Myles Garrett and his ability to just dominate and take over a game. And that one player in a defense that can really do that, that's the edge rusher that can just destroy drives with one play.
Agreed. And when you look at the side of the ball when Ole Miss is on defense, you've got to assume that Miami is going to run the ball at them a lot. I have to give a lot of credit to Mark Fletcher Jr. I thought that he and the Miami running game were the lesser of the two attacks going into this game when you compared it to Ohio State, Bo Jackson, obviously far short of his namesake, and that offensive line. I didn't think that the Ohio State running game was better than last year. How could you? They had, obviously both Travion Henderson and they had Quinshon Judkins last year. That was a juggernaut rushing attack. But I thought that Ohio State would look better. And you got to give a lot of credit, not just to the Miami offensive line. I do give them credit. But Mark Fletcher ran really strong. And I think if he runs that way against Ole Miss, it could set up well for Miami. I didn't really understand why Georgia didn't run the ball more. Nate Frazier for Georgia, who is a very strong back, when you look at the way Mark Fletcher Jr. and Nate Frazier run the ball, very similar running styles. Nate Frazier had 15 carries for 86 yards. That's 5.7 yards per carry, which, checking my math, is pretty darn good. And he had a long of 16 yards, so it's not like he ripped off one big long yard that skewed all of, or one long run that skewed all of his numbers. They just didn't get him the ball enough. Gunnar Stockton ran the ball 13 times for 20 yards, and they were not fooled by Gunnar Stockton. And I just remember watching that game. When Gunnar Stockton would run the ball, he would get hit and he would go down. When Nate Frazier was running the ball, Nate Frazier would take a couple of hits before he would go down, and it was the difference of turning 3-yard gains into 5-yard gains. I think Mark Fletcher can do that against Ole Miss. And, that's going to be important because you don't want to give Trinidad Chambliss a bunch of possessions. You want to limit those, even against even with a good Miami defense. They give that guy too many touches, he is going to hit some big plays. That's what they do. I think it's going to be a really exciting game. Right now, Miami is favored by 3.5 points, which, I'm not going to say that that's wrong. But for me, betting Ole Miss on the money line there is where all the value is because I could see this game going either way.
From a talent perspective, my gut gives it to Ole Miss, and they've won big games. The losses from Miami's side are really tough to stomach. And it shows that there's just a level of preparedness and crispness that Cristobal doesn't have his guys ready on a week in and week out basis. But the flip side of it is they're not looking ahead of anybody in the playoff. You can't because you're playing top 10 teams from the start to the finish. So, when Cristobal brings his team to bear against another top 10 ranked team, he does show up. This game is a coin flip to me. I think you're exactly right. Miami needs to limit possessions and really grind out the clock when they have the ball, and they have the guys to do that. The flip side of it is Ole Miss's offense is pretty stinking good. We saw them go toe-to-toe with Georgia, which I didn't think they'd be able to do. I thought they'd be fortunate to put up 21 points, but Trinidad Chambliss proved me wrong.
So which way are you going to go on this game? I'm taking Ole Miss plus 3.5, but I wouldn't selfishly, in my world, where I could wave a magic wand and Fernando Mendoza has an off game and the Ducks somehow get past Indiana, which when we talk about that game, that is a fantasy for me. I would love them to beat Miami and beat Cristobal for a national championship.
and put that first ring on the board. So I'm gonna go with Miami in this game.
All right. All right. Well, it'll be interesting. That game is Thursday. It kicks off at 7:30 Eastern. That is in Arizona in the Fiesta Bowl, which I think is a little bit ridiculous that Miami and Ole Miss are playing in Phoenix, and then you have Oregon taking on Indiana in Atlanta. I mean, couldn't they have
I
just
don't
split those?
understand how this happened.
And it's like, I don't agree with the neutral sites anyways. And I'm not saying reseed or anything like that based on location. But can't we be even just a little logical when we think about the fans? Because you look at Oregon, we've talked about this. Over 15,000 air miles from Eugene to Miami, Miami to Eugene, Eugene to Atlanta, Atlanta to Eugene. And they're going to do that at this point. Then there's another 5,000 air miles if they go back to Miami for the national championship, which is a little ridiculous. You know, Indiana has had a much better time of it. They went to the Rose Bowl, sure. But the trip for Indiana to Atlanta is a completely different trip, not just for the team. I'm less worried about the team. I'm sure Oregon's charter jet is very nice, and those players are going to have every technological advantage that you could possibly have when it comes to being ready physiologically. But it's just easier for all of these fans. And look, you and I know, we've been to these games over the years. Oregon's always been at a disadvantage. The one game I can remember where we didn't have a decided disadvantage, and it was more like 50-50, was the Rose Bowl in 2014 against Florida State. But in every other game, and I bet you if we were to fly to Atlanta for this game, it's going to be 80% Indiana fans who are excited, haven't been there before. You know, Oregon, it's a little old hat, and I think asking fans to travel that many times, it's going to get us. And so now, do Indiana fans know how to be really loud yet? I'm not so sure. I'm not sure that they're really ready for the prime time, but this whole thing is ridiculous, and that's really the game that should be played in Arizona. That would be much fairer if Oregon and Indiana were playing in Phoenix, where a lot more Ducks could show up from the region. But hey, that's not the case.
Well, I think for Indiana fans, they would rather go to Arizona than they would go to Atlanta. And then you look at Ole Miss and Miami, and it just makes sense for those fan bases to, descend on Atlanta for the week and go to that game. And it makes it a lot easier with school back in session and all of those other elements that play into these things and make it very hard to travel for a Thursday and a Friday game.
It's just all these little things that add up. And you look at the college football playoff, and it's really hard to be upset with the 12-team playoff when you think about how far we've come in college football and how we started with polls and, co-national champions and all these things. And we've come so far. But to have these little oversights that, nobody stress tested the system. You had these old white guys, and they didn't hand it down to a bunch of young people from all different backgrounds who all love college football to say, how does this go wrong? Why did we miss that step? I don't really understand that, because these are all largely old white men and women, but they are all supposed to be very qualified people who are very freaking smart. Why are we still in this situation? And really the question I want to ask you is, what is your confidence level, scale of 1 to 10? That something gets fixed materially by next year? Because you think about everything we just talked about. I also mentioned the transfer situation, the coaching situation. It is well and truly fucked right now. As much as I love the 12-team playoff, it is also simultaneously totally fucked.
There's a couple elements that come to mind there. The first is the transfer portal. I don't understand why the transfer portal is not closed until we get through the playoff completing. And then you've got the weirdness where every game that Ole Miss wins, Lane Kiffin cashes $250,000, which is just icky to me. But I get that's also part of LSU's contract. That's LSU paying him, not Ole Miss. Nothing from that perspective. And
Well, it was a bonus that he had in his Ole Miss contract that LSU said, if the team goes on and wins those games, we will honor your bonus. And to their credit, they have it's the same Ole Miss. This is the same Ole Miss that fired the athletic director for giving out too generous of a contract that pays for past performance and doesn't pay for future performance. And this is the one that the governor said they were going to do different. Well, they did do it differently. Nobody's ever done this before. But this is the most just, it's mind blowing when you consider
when you have golden handcuffs in a corporate world. Any new potential employer is going to have to buy out your RSUs. They're going to have to pay out any bonus you were going to walk away from. Like, we see this in the corporate world time and time again, right? Like, it's not that big of a surprise. And for them to get Lane Kiffin and get him to leave, this was the cost of it.
Here's why it's a surprise to me, John. Because they didn't have to do it. They could have said to him, we'll put that into $1 million signing bonus or $500,000 signing bonus. If they didn't put the contract language in the contract that stipulated it was tied to Ole Miss wins, that would never have come out. It would have just been $1 million richer contract. And then you never have the negative PR or the weirdness surrounding this. It wasn't necessary.
Yeah, but LSU was looking at this like, there's no way Ole Miss wins their game. There's no way they beat Georgia after that. Like, they didn't think they'd have to pay this out.
They didn't know. It was all done before the playoffs started. But in hindsight, like, it's a $94 million contract.
Yeah, it is a very tiny. It's a fun headline. So that's point number one, is the transfer portal's weird. Point number two is, like, look, they are working around the NFL, and ask the NBA on Christmas Day, even with a slew of bad NFL games, like, you schedule around the NFL, and it's wild card weekend, and this is how, having not had everything wrap up before New Year's Day, it lands. And, historically, we've had the national championship game the Monday after wild card weekend, and now wild card weekend has 6 games on each side. So you play all 3 days. And, like, this is the, if you're the NCAA college football playoff, you want your ratings, you want those contracts, and this is how you get around it. Now, the third point that I will say is, hey, they've already made substantial changes. Do you remember the bye teams last year and the weird rules they had where it was all conference champions? Arizona State should not have been a bye team. Boise State should not have been a bye team. And they did change that immediately, because they recognized it was an issue. So where there are things...
they still didn't pause to say, okay, there's a hole in the dam. Where might we find other holes in the dam? They didn't. They were like, hey, anybody got chewing gum? And they plugged the hole. And then they thought they were good and they walked away again. And now we're back.
We will get to the point where it's a 16-team playoff. I firmly believe that, because it's one extra game it's multiple extra games. Sorry, it's more than one extra game.
It's a lot of extra revenue.
So it's a ton of revenue, exactly.
And I think we're going to get to a place where we do get rid of the seating committee and we move to an on-the-field play-in model. I don't know what it will look like. I don't know how it will consider the different conferences that are obviously in different places, but, those things are hard to parse, in terms of quantifiable measures. But I do suspect that we will get to a point where bids are earned, like in the NFL. We get to this scenario where it's like, well, if this happens and this happens and this happens, it's going to be these teams. And I hope that we end up with play-in games, really. I think that that's where we should be, is like a certain, whether conferences want to give bids directly to regular season champions and save them an extra game, which I think there will be too much pressure to generate revenue. I think what they'll do is they'll create playing games at the conference level. I created this proposal, but the more I think about it, the more I think it probably is the likelihood. If you go to 16, you got to populate the 16. You're going to have to revisit that conversation of how teams qualify. Nobody is happy with these, like, slightly similar but always a little different resumes being put side by side, and then having a room full of people that never feel representative of how, the college football landscape looks as a whole, deciding who's better, right? I think Miami is a great example this year. Could have been Miami. It could have been Notre Dame. And all that goes to show, beating one of the top 2 teams, that college football has, in a lot of years, more than 12 or so teams that could win a championship with the right playoff bracket. Just like
especially right now in the NIL era, which we're seeing, hey, the SEC's taken a huge step back now that everybody gets to pay players. And This isn't just me saying this. Ed Orgeron, has that very famous voice clip now where he says, "We used to have to carry bags of money through the back door. Now we just get to walk through the front."
Yeah.
Basically saying, yeah, we've been paying players for years, and now, hey, everybody gets to do it. The transfer portal is alive and well, and parity is at a level that I don't think it's ever been in college
Although,
football.
John, there is problem. There is a big problem when it comes to the transfer portal. And I don't know if you saw the news coming out of Seattle today, but Damon Williams, who was the Huskies quarterback this year, had signed a deal last week to stay with the Huskies. And then today, he announced that he was entering the portal. So there is a signed agreement on the table. This happened last year with a Wisconsin player who transferred, a defensive back who transferred from Wisconsin to, I believe, Alabama. But Damon Williams has obviously gotten some other offer that he wants to go take, and he thinks he can just do it. Now, the University of Washington is saying they have a signed contract. They're going to hold him to it. They're not going to let him out of that contract. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. It was inevitable that you would have players that wouldn't, like, if you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you don't really understand the legal ramifications of all of this. And like, once you've signed a deal, you've created, consideration and dependencies and all that. You can't just walk away from it like that.
Teenagers already think they're invincible, and they don't understand these things, and they just kind of have this, well, I'm a superstar, I can do what I want. There are no ramifications to my actions, and hey, you got to learn these things the hard way.
Well, and I think in the past, when you took the under the table money, if you did do something like that, people got their feelings hurt, but nobody was going to say anything because it was like, being at a drug dealer's house and getting punched. What are you going to call the cops? No, like, you don't want to be in that situation.
This is also a lot harder to transfer. A lot harder to transfer back then too. You had to graduate, transfer on a graduate program, and then you had 1 year of eligibility or sit out a year. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, it is going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. In the meantime, we do have a big game on Friday night. As you and I discussed, it's a game that I was feeling mildly optimistic about going into today, call it. And then today, the news about Jordan Davison, the star freshman running back. He is big. He is bruising. He's like 6'4", 230. And he's been a revelation this year. The Ducks running game has been one that has evolved a lot throughout the year. It started with Noah Whittington and Mekhi Hughes, who was the transfer in from Tulane. He was, an all-conference player a year ago at Tulane. He never really found his spot in the rotation. Jordan Davison did. De'Aaron Hill Jr. also did. We had moments throughout the year where Jaden Lamar was getting into the rotation, and he looked really good. He had some spark to him. But we get news today that not only has Jordan Davison broken his clavicle, which, at the running back position, you can't play with a broken collarbone. You're done for the year. But both Jaden Lamar and Mekhi Hughes. Now, Mekhi Hughes had taken a red shirt early in the year. It was possible that they could take it off of him. And if you were a player on a team and there wasn't this like Wild West free agent, free for all every single year, you would consider burning a red shirt to come back and play in that season and help the team win a national championship. Like, why wouldn't you burn your red shirt if it meant that you could play a key role in winning a national championship? And yet, Mekhi Hughes entered the portal. So too did Jaden Lamar, which is really unfortunate because that means 3 running backs of their crew are now gone, and that leaves us with Noah Whittington, who I don't love, and De'Aaron Hill, who I like, but neither one of those guys is Jordan Davison. He was the best running back of the 3. It wasn't close. And then you just consider the depth issues.
The depth is where it jumps out. Yeah.
Now. And while I can appreciate that Indiana still doesn't have Stephen Daly at defensive tackle, he obviously injured himself after the Big Ten championship. Didn't really prove to be a problem against Alabama. They have so much talent on that defense with Aiden Fisher, who's a first-team All-Big Ten linebacker, with Tyreek Tucker, with D'Angelo Pons, with Lewis Moore. Like, these are all first-team Indiana players. Elijah Hardy is a second-teamer. Amari Farrell's a second-teamer. It's just down the list. These guys on defense, this is It's not like a gritty, this is an upstart Indiana team. People still don't seem to fully appreciate Indiana, but if you watch them, they look as much like an NFL defense as any Bama defense or Georgia defense or LSU defense or Ohio State defense that we've seen in the last couple of years, in the last, call it 5, 6, 7 years. And man, I really worry for the Oregon offense. They got 20 carries for 101 yards in the first meeting between these two teams earlier in the season. But, that was with a, pretty well-staffed running back committee. And then, at the same time, of those 101 yards, 26 of them came on one long run. By who? Jordan Davison. So when you take that out, you're talking about 19 carries for 75 yards, and that's actually not very good. That does not win football games.
And even in that game that they, from a stats perspective, had a decent day, they got handled by Indiana in Autzen. It was close from a score perspective, but you also got to remember one of those touchdowns came on a pick six, and Oregon put up 20 points. So their offense actually only put up 13. And Indiana just had their number and kind of beat their butts up and down the field. I don't see a different outcome this week. I'm very worried for Friday. Dante Moore is going to have to play the game of his life and prove out why some people think he should be the number one player off the board
And so, John,
this spring.
Help me parse that, because I've got to admit I have a little bit of cognitive dissonance when it comes to Dante Moore and this idea of him as a number one pick. I don't disagree. He's got to play a completely clean game. He's got to make every throw. He's got to do what, frankly, he has not done this year. Even against Rutgers, when he threw for 4 touchdowns, it wasn't a perfect game. Like, the closest thing that he had to a clean game was against Oregon State, and Indiana is not Oregon State. But like, if he looks like he did against James Madison and Texas Tech, you could take that film, and they're like, oh, release the unedited footage. You could edit the footage to make it very clear why he would be considered for a number one pick. But then when you have the unedited footage and you see the 2 picks that he threw against James Madison in the second half that let them go on that run to come back that were just lazy, dumb picks. And then you look through another one against Texas Tech. Dante Moore has these moments where I just don't know what he's going to do. And I don't really trust him as a quarterback. Not the way I trust it. And I go back to Marcus Mariota, right? When the Ducks were this close to a national championship. The difference was you trusted Mariota. He was going to make the right reads in the RPO. He was going to hit the seams. He threw a beautiful ball with all kinds of zip that was also very catchable. Some of those things do apply to Dante, but he doesn't do it with the consistency that Mariota did it. And as you said offline, against Miami or Ole Miss, we could probably get away with that. We could probably get away with no Jordan Davison. But against this Indiana team that is not, in my opinion, just the best team in the country this year, but they might be historically good, I don't think it's going to cut it. I think this is a 2-touchdown game.
The counterpoint that I've got for you, and when you and I have talked about his draft stock, the thing you've reminded me time and time again is he's 20. He's super young and he has all of the talent in the world, and people look at him as wow, if we get him in the building, we can turn him into something great. A lot of people said that about Anthony Richardson, and Anthony Richardson's career is over, but that's an aside. He's a different kind of quarterback. The thing I want to focus on is when the game is tight and when it's a big spotlight, Dante Moore plays lights out. And then he almost, like, when he has, a massive lead, he just kind of lets off the gas. Like, I'm thinking about Penn State, and when they went up 17-3, it looked like Oregon was going to score another 14 points in the last 4 minutes of the game because Dante Moore was throwing the piss out of the ball. He was hitting the right reads, and he was playing an incredible game. And then it all just went away. But then you go to overtime, and it's like he woke back up. And the 2 possessions that Dante Moore played in Penn State, in overtime, when the game was on the line, he played lights out. And yes, Penn State then went on, this horrendous down down spiral, and then James Franklin was fired, and then they lost their quarterback and all of that. Penn State was
But
good
Iowa too.
that
Iowa's
week.
another great example. When you look at, he led that 9-play, 65-yard drive that ended in the Sappington 40-yard field goal at the very end of the third quarter, and the Ducks go up 15-7. And it feels like you finally have a little bit of breathing room. And then in the fourth quarter, the Ducks do absolutely nothing and allow Iowa to climb back into it. I mean, that was ridiculous. The Ducks it goes field goal, Iowa, Ducks punt, then a touchdown for Iowa, then the Ducks have a 10-play drive that ends in a field goal, end of the game. A whole quarter gone, and the Ducks didn't do anything on offense. And I just, again, when I'm looking at Indiana, I am looking at those other top defenses. So what did we do against Iowa? What did we do in our first matchup against Indiana? What did we do against Northwestern? And even that Northwestern game, they made us work for it late. It was a 31-0 game going into the fourth quarter, and then we put up 3 points in the fourth quarter, and Northwestern put up 14. So I do worry about that a little bit with him, that when we're playing well through three quarters, I just worry about that let off, and I just don't know that that's going to be situationally where we are on Friday. I think the question is going to be, does he get us off to a good start and be competitive? I worry. I don't even mean to speak this into existence. It feels a little bit like going into the Rose Bowl last year. And you and I both said going into the Rose Bowl last year, yeah, we beat Ohio State at home in the regular season. But some of those things felt like they broke our way. We weren't super confident that we were going to beat Ohio State. We didn't love the bye. And then we got run out of the building. Indiana has run you out of the building capabilities. And I really worry. So Dante's got to get out of the gate hot. We can't have a slow start. Just can't have it.
Well, and I think that's my major thing is the worst potential thing that could happen in my mind is if we went into the fourth quarter with a 10-point or a 14-point lead, God forbid, and then they just let off the gas. I think the way this game is going to play out, Dante is going to be in a position where he has to keep attacking and he cannot let off the gas. Now, I will also say, looking at that Texas Tech game, Oregon's defensive coordinator pitched one hell of a game. And if they bring that same game planning and strategy and execution to Indiana, maybe they don't score 30 points and maybe it's a lot closer of a rock fight down in the 24-21 range. And, if Dante Moore can keep pace and just stay dialed in for all 60 minutes, they could win. But I think Oregon's shot there is maybe a 30% shot to win. I'd give it 70% to Indiana. They're so talented, but they haven't played on this stage before.
No, they haven't. But, when I look at Texas Tech, it's not entirely surprising to me that Texas Tech got shut out. Baron Morton was an okay quarterback. He was fine. I wrote this going into that game. He's totally fine. He ends up with 4 turnovers. Cameron Dickey was an okay running back. He had 2 good games where he had 100 yards. Otherwise, he was under 100 yards every game, and he didn't do anything in that game. You look at their wide receiving core. None of them averaged 15 yards per reception or higher. So they had no big play threats. They had a bunch of intermediate receivers. That was going to be easy for Oregon to shut down. And yes, Brandon Finney feasted. Oregon's got a very good defense, but this is a completely different Indiana offense. Fernando Mendoza is the best quarterback that Oregon has seen this year. He's the best quarterback that Oregon will see this year. And when you look at somebody like him, he's not an Anthony Richardson out there winging it and playing on physicality. He's a really smart guy. You better believe he's going to be spending more time in the tape room than anybody else on that team or on Oregon's team, I would bet. And so I think, from a quarterback perspective, it goes up a notch. When you look at the running backs and you look at Roman Hemby, who came over from, I want to say, Maryland, he is one of the best running backs that Oregon has seen all year. And then he's backed up by one of the other best running backs they've seen all year in Kalen Black. And those two are just bruising. And then you throw in the fact that Indiana also had their offensive tackle win the Lineman of the Year award. So, when you wonder where they're going to go for a yard, you kind of know. And then on the outside, you have Omar Cooper Jr., who is an NFL wide receiver one body type, and he plays big. He obviously had that massive catch that, kept them undefeated. But he is a completely different beast for the Oregon secondary to handle. And then across from him, you have Elijah Surratt, who can play anywhere on the field. And he's strong, he's fast, he catches deep balls, he's underneath. I know it sounds like I'm just tooting Indiana's horn, but they are loaded at every position. And then they have Becker. They have Charlie Becker as their third wide receiver, who reminds me of Eric Decker. And I'm not sure if it's just because they're both white, and I'm not sure if it's because Becker and Decker rhyme, but he reminds me of Eric Decker in the way that he goes up and gets these big downfield plays. He's averaging like 17, 18 yards per catch, something like that. They're going to be a handful. And I agree with you that Oregon has as good a shot as anybody to limit the Indiana offense. And I think limiting them is 24 to 27 points. And then the question is, how is Oregon going to manufacture points? They're not getting Evan Stewart back. So, they got Gary Bryant Jr. back. The receiving core, we hope that it would get healthy and take a leap in the postseason. We have not seen that yet. We have not seen Dante Moore take a leap. So it's got to happen there. It's got to happen with Kenyon Sadiq, who hasn't done anything. And maybe go to Jamari Johnson more, the number 2 tight end, who I think is the most NFL ready of maybe all the players on offense right now.
Well, you say that, but, Dante Moore is somehow slated to be, potentially the Raiders starting quarterback next year.
Besides Dante. Yeah, okay, I think so. And let me ask you a question on that, because as we kind of hedge into NFL, do you think who needs Fernando Mendoza more? Is it the Raiders, who are about to start a massive rebuild with $100 million in cap money, with the number 1 pick, with some talent on the team in Brock Bowers, in Max Crosby, bringing in a new coach, etc., or the New York Jets, who are the sorriest situation in football? But if anybody needs the raw can do, we got this guy's mindset of a Fernando Mendoza, isn't it the Jets? Like, if anybody in theory could handle the New York media pissing on the Jets every week, isn't it Fernando Mendoza?
It definitely feels like it. As you're describing this, I just feel so bad for these two guys' careers. I hope they find an extension somewhere like Sam Darnold did, and find a reimagining of their career. Both of these teams are having a new head coach come in. The Jets situation is just god awful. I don't even know who you're excited about from a personnel perspective. If you're a Jets fan, I guess Garrett Wilson, I guess Breece Hall, but not really. And with the Raiders, we'll see if Crosby's still around. There are rumors, or sources are saying, that they're finally willing to potentially deal him. And hey, that's maybe 2 first-rounders and a key developmental player that you could get in return, or something along those lines. Maybe he gets traded in the draft. But I would also say Ashton Gianti is there in I almost just said Oakland, Vegas as well.
Yeah, but what is he like? Is he actually good? I don't think we know.
We don't know. You can't say anybody is good or bad. I mean, this Raiders offense that Chip Kelly was blowing or botching the plays for half the year, and then they trade Jacoby Myers, who winds up being the skeleton key that unlocks the Jags passing attack.
And John, did you see the news that came out, I want to say yesterday, about Pete Carroll's sons?
I did not.
So one of his sons was the offensive line coach, and then his other son was the assistant quarterbacks coach. And there were stories coming out yesterday that the offensive line was just being run through drills, and they were never told what the purpose of the drills were. They were just mindlessly going through them, and that the coach, Carroll's son, was completely in over his head, and that the offensive linemen started setting up their own meetings with Geno Smith and Ashton Genty to try and understand what they needed them to do differently or better, and the coaches got cut out entirely. So when you think about, the running game was atrocious. You have to feel bad for Ashton Genty, who's running behind a line that has no coach, and the head coach, you can't say anything to the head coach because it's his kid. All of those are just really low-hanging pieces of fruit that get cleaned up next year. And it actually makes me think, if you step back from the dumpster fire that Las Vegas has been over the last couple of years, it's actually kind of an appealing landing spot. There are worse places to live than Las Vegas. There's lots of shows. Like if you have a family, there's stuff to do. It's easy to get to.
Real estate's not that expensive, too.
Yeah, it's not terrible. It's it's gotten more expensive, but I think 10 draft picks, to your point, if they trade Crosby, they'll have more than 10 draft picks in the 2026 draft. That is a haul. The right coach and GM can do a lot with that, and it includes the number 1 pick. And so if they wanted to move off the number 1 pick, if they thought they wanted to they thought they could get Dante Moore at 5, maybe Miami moves up, right? Maybe they're ready to move off Tua and they think they can do something to dump him and they can move that pick. But I think Las Vegas is actually a pretty attractive place to be if you are, I don't know, Jim Harbaugh or John Harbaugh, the other Harbaugh.
$100 million in cap space too. That solves a lot of problems. You look at the Panthers that were able to pay their way into, it's a top 20 defense, but it was better than they were last year. And you and I joke about this, but hey, they are a playoff team now. And that was one of the major things they needed to fix. The other element is, one of the biggest problems was Mark Davis being an owner and how bought in is he really? Is he in over his head? Well, now he's got Tom Brady advising him in that ownership group. And how much does that impact your ability to hire, build, and create a structure that actually gets back to winning ways?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's going to be really interesting to see. I think, again, Las Vegas, we're going to talk about this in more detail next week when we talk about the 8 sorriest franchises in the league right now and what their outlook is for 2026 and beyond. But I think Las Vegas is easy to look at and say, oh, they're in one of the worst places, but they're really not to me. There are other franchises that are in much worse places. And then you have some that, it's like the Giants. Who are they going to get to coach the team? It feels like the Giants are in a really bad place, but the Giants, when healthy, when you think about that front 4 is very ferocious. If they can get some linebackers to fill in and help, clean up the run defense, and then you get Malik Neighbors back and you get Cam Scatteraboo back and Jackson Dart learns how to, play in a way that doesn't expose himself to injury constantly. The Giants are in a terrible situation, but
the NFC is not great, or the NFC East isn't great. I mean,
no. But then you look at Miami. I'm just going to say it. That's a terrible situation.
Doesn't seem like Mike McDaniel's leaving either, unless that is the mystery 7th team that's courting John Harbaugh.
Now, John, it would stand to reason that when a franchise has said, we are not firing our coach, that the prediction markets and the associated sports books should reflect that in their odds. Oh, a statement has been made. It's not a show of support. It's a decision. We are not going to fire our coach. He's going with us into 2026. But did you know, on Call Sheet, I just bet Mike McDaniel not to be the coach of the Miami Dolphins on September 1st, 2026 at plus 150 odds. That is almost even money. Now that, John, does not seem like the right price for somebody who definitely is not getting fired. Does it?
It's definitely not, hey, he's our guy. We're going into the draft with him. Now, I would expect this to happen this week, next week. Like, if you are the Dolphins and you want one of these, I mean, okay, but here's the flip side. Who are the coaches that are being interviewed right now? Like, Matt Nagy is getting head coaching interviews. Garrett, he was Cowboy quarterback, or Jason Garrett is getting head coach interviews. Like, this is not a very, very strong coaching market right now. There are not a ton of candidates out there.
No.
So that's one of the flip sides is like, do you really want to go into that pool right now?
Not a ton of candidates. And there are also a lot of jobs. Like you're talking about, Arizona's open because they let go of Gannon. Atlanta's open because they let go of Raheem Morris, finally. Even though he did finish the year on a 4-game win streak, including a win over the Rams, which was really impressive.
And he tied the division winning record of 8-9.
Yeah, true. Baltimore obviously is now open. Cleveland is open again. It feels like Cleveland's always one of these up-and-coming offensive coordinators who misses out on other jobs and gets tired of waiting. That's what Kevin Stefanski was. It feels like that's what it'll be again, because just like anybody who has choices, like, could you imagine how much money it would take for John Harbaugh to say yes to Cleveland?
I mean, you still got to deal with the Deshaun Watson disaster. You need to go find a quarterback. Like, it's a lot.
But if the top of the market is $12 million a year, and Jimmy Haslam said, "I'll pay you 30," would you do
you're not saying no to that,
right? That's what I'm saying. Like, where is that number? And when we talk about now that Harbaugh's on the market, he's already heard from 7 teams. Who's the mystery 7th team? It could be the Dolphins. Could it be the Cincinnati Bengals?
Could it be the Bucks?
But I offer you the Bengals because you don't think the Bengals have looked across the sidelines at him for 18 years as he has won their division and thought, "I wish he was our coach." And I'm sorry, but like, Zach Taylor has not done 3 straight years missing the playoffs. Could be the Bengals.
The Bengals have a habit of hanging on to head coaches for way too long. I think we are in the too long space, not way too long space yet, but a lot of the buzz around just Bengals fandom is they're ready to see Zach Taylor go, and they don't want to watch Burrow and these wide receivers be wasted. Now, one of the major problems is they've tied up all of this cap money into their offense, and they don't have as much to spend on the defense. Like an
8-year-old in Madden. It's ridiculous. It's not how you build a team.
But if there's a guy who could come in and put together a semi-competent defense to be good enough to win 10 or 11 games in a division that has the Steelers, where Mike Tomlin has barely been above 500 for how many years in a row, and he's about to probably have another first-round exit. The Ravens that, hey, they're laying this all at John Harbaugh's feet. It's not all on John Harbaugh. And then, obviously, the Browns are the Browns, and they're going to be blowing it all up and starting it over. And, hey, I actually think Kevin Stefanski may be a head coach for another team starting next year. We'll see what happens. He probably deserves another shot.
Totally agree.
But, yeah.
He's almost like done a tour of duty or a prison sentence, depending on how you look at it, in Cleveland. And now he's a free man, and he can go do, like, motivational talks and inspire people and start a company and become a billionaire.
I really hope of that. I really hope he doesn't go to Arizona, because I don't want him in our division, is what I will say.
I'm not worried about him. I hear what you're saying. Arizona, I don't know, that we have bigger problems to worry about, in a division where we already have San Francisco and we have the Rams. Yeah, we were lucky that Arizona was so down this year, but you just have to assume that's not going to be the case. They're going to move off Kyler. Obviously, they've changed the coaching staff, or they're going to change the coaching staff, so that'll be interesting. And then, we talked about Las Vegas. We talked briefly about the Giants. That's obviously an open coaching job because they made that change with Dable earlier in the year, and then Mike Kafka was the interim coach. He's definitely not going to be getting the head coaching job full-time. And then, of course, the Tennessee Titans, which also made a change mid-season, and then we're with Mike McCoy, I believe, for the rest of the year. So, it's going to be interesting to see who fills all 7 of these spots. And I think, to our discussion, there are going to be some new names. There are going to be some retreads. It could be a Matt Nagy. It could be a Kevin Stefanski, which I really wouldn't call a new name or a retread yet. But, somebody's got to fill those seats. It'll be interesting to see who does. It's also going to be interesting to see who the new Lions offensive coordinator is. The Lions obviously had a really tough season outside of the San Francisco 49ers. Nobody suffered more injuries than the Detroit Lions. On defense, they lost both of their safeties for the year. They lost their cornerbacks for a long period of time. Their front 7 suffered a bunch of injuries. And, of course, they lost defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn to the Jets. On offense, they lost Ben Johnson to the Bears. And obviously the Bears are in the playoffs and playing very good football while the Lions are sitting at home. Midway through the year, Dan Campbell takes the play calling back from his offensive coordinator, John Morton. The numbers go up a little bit, but then, we have a lot of the same kind of confounding questions that we are asking ourselves down the stretch as the Lions fail to play very good football. So Morton's out. don't know who is going to fill his shoes yet. As you said offline, hopefully they don't run a Dan Campbell lookalike contest to try and fill his shoes this time. Obviously, it didn't work out very well with Morton. He does look very much like Dan Campbell, not a very good offensive coordinator. But we'll see. It's tough for me to see all of this talent on the Lions. I'm going to make a second Madden reference in like 2 minutes. But in Madden, when you just look at their team, they're almost freaking unstoppable. And yet, they went from such a force the last 2 seasons to such a disappointment this year, just as an NFL fan.
They were
I like the
15 and
version of
2.
the Lions that's good.
They were 15 and 2. Like, it doesn't matter how good of a team you are and how talented of a team you are. You can have the best coaching staff in the league. To win 15 games is absurd. And then this level of regression, it's remarkable. And you mentioned that when Dan Campbell took over the play calling duties, yeah, their numbers went up slightly, but they got to just feast on the Commanders right out the gate and kind of pad those stats early. But when you look at just the eye test, and yes, stats are there for a reason, and it's great when you want to nerd out, but does the offense look better? No, they didn't. They ran more Jahmyr Gibbs plays, and they were hoping for more explosives, but when it came down to it, still took them overtime to beat the Giants and barely get past them when that could have been their season late in the season. And it just felt like it was that time and time again. And we talked about the Lions, and after kind of the first quarter of the year, the magic wasn't there. Something was wrong, and they just didn't have the juice. And that just never came back this year. And it all comes down to coaching. When you lose your deco and your offensive coordinator, that's bound to happen. And like you said, especially with Ben Johnson being the 2 seed, although they did beat him in week 18, and good for them. And if Nick Sirianni, well, it took him overtime. But if Nick Sirianni had actually maybe played his starters, Nick Sirianni would be getting a patchwork Packers team and then maybe a home game next week. So I don't know. You know how I feel about Nick Sirianni. I still don't understand why they just decided they're going to let the Commanders win, but yeah.
Yeah. I realized you said week 18. I was thinking back to week 3 when they stomped them 52-21.
Mm-hmm.
Was that right? But I totally hear you. Okay, so before we wrap up the coaching conversation, just tell me, John Harbaugh, where do you think he lands between Arizona, Atlanta, Baltimore, Cleveland, Las Vegas, the Giants, and the Tennessee Titans? If you had to put your money in one place right now, where does it go?
It's really tough because I just saw a report before we started that he's the leading candidate for the Giants. But if I'm John Harbaugh, I'm going to Vegas. I think that is weirdly the most enticing place to play, and they can get out of Geno pretty easily if they don't want him to be the starter, or maybe you even start Geno for 4 games next year while you let either Mendoza or Moore learn the ropes and figure out what it looks like. But I think that's really appealing. You've got a franchise cornerstone in Max Crosby. You've got a transcendent tight end in Brock Bowers, who is going to have an actual offensive coordinator, I assume, come with him. But that is the other aspect, is Harbaugh's got to go pick somebody now and then start filling out a coaching staff.
Absolutely.
And then you have the war chest to go build out the rest of your team as you see fit.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't disagree with you. I think Atlanta's going to make a big push, and I think Atlanta could make sense on a lot of different fronts. You saw the move that they made today to restructure Kirk Cousins' deal. That will make it easier for them to move off of him and split that dead cap money into 2 seasons. I still think they're going to ride with Michael Penix going forward, but I won't be surprised if they do draft another quarterback. Look, if they come back healthy on offense between Bijan and Kyle Pitts and Drake London, they have a pretty good offense. And their defense was good against the pass this year. They had very good pass rush, and their secondary held up. Now, if they can get a rush defense to complement that, Atlanta could be good in what is not a very good division. So I could see him going to Atlanta, but I think you're right. I think right now, the money, as I see it, if I'm John Harbaugh, and of course, I don't know what his family situation is, and that obviously is a big wild card that we can't speculate about. But if I'm John Harbaugh, I am most interested in Las Vegas and the weather and the proximity to everything. And I am second most interested in Atlanta because that is also a big city. I think you can draw a lot of free agents to Atlanta. And I think they have the makings to play John Harbaugh style football. But The Giants, I agree. I don't really see the Giants. I don't see Cleveland. I don't see Tennessee. I don't see Arizona. And I don't see one of these wild cards. I don't think it's going to be a Miami. I don't think it's going to be a Baltimore or whomever, although I wouldn't be shocked. Crazier things have happened.
The only thing I want to add to Atlanta is they do need to find a GM, so he would almost get to go in and help pick his boss. But then the other element of it is Arthur Blank cares about winning. Arthur Blank cares about his community. Arthur Blank, from everything I've been able to gather, seems like the kind of guy that I would want to work for. And I think if you're John Harbaugh and you've been coaching for 18 years, like, come on, you've got FU money at this point. It's not about like making and setting up generational wealth. It's about, legacy and doing what you love and working for people who get it. The quarterback situation is a bit of a mess, like you said, but that's a division where the Bucks are flagging, and we'll see what happens there. The Carolinas are not, they're not really set up for the future, and we'll see what happens with the Saints. But that should be a division that is ripe for the plucking.
Completely agree. Completely agree. All right, John, it's time. Let's talk about these wild card matchups. Let's break them down and let's make some picks. It is exciting. We've talked about the AFC. It's wide open. We'll get to that in a second, but the slate doesn't start in the AFC. The slate starts on Saturday in the NFC with the Los Angeles Rams traveling to the somehow division-winning Carolina Panthers. And obviously, this is the second time that Matt Stafford and the Rams have made the trip out east to Charlotte to play Carolina. And the first time didn't go so well. Carolina got out to a 14-7 lead early. They ended up winning the game 31-28. And it's one of those losses that, despite all the talent, despite how good the Rams can look this year, it's one of those losses that make you go, gosh, that's right. The Rams are really beatable.
They gave up 31 points to this Carolina team. That's the thing that blows my mind the most. But the Rams are 10-point favorites. People do expect them to come in.
Now.
10, it moved up. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things where, hey, when this is a mid-season game, maybe it was a look-ahead game for the Rams back when they played this game. It is a long trek out there. It's different when you get to playoff football and there is no more look ahead, because if you lose, your season is over, and you approach these games with a different mindset. I do expect Sean McVay to have their team ready to go. And it is this weird situation where Carolina lost their play-in game that would have clinched the playoffs for them. And then, because it's a three-way tie and division rules are weird, they were able to move on thanks to Atlanta beating the Saints. And here we are. And, one thing, can I just say, hey, props to the Texans for not being the weird Saturday afternoon game for like the third year in a row, because they've been that boring AFC South winner.
No
which
doubt.
I love that little
They got
wrinkle to all
promoted,
this.
John.
They
Third
did.
time the charm.
They did. But it's hard for me to not think the Rams are going to march into Carolina, avenge their loss, and then be ready to travel wherever they need to next week based on how the rest of the chips fall.
Now, I think if you look at that game, Carolina, the first game between these two teams, Carolina ran the ball pretty well, and they didn't ask Bryce Young to do too much. He only had 20 pass attempts in that game. He was 15 for 20, he had 3 touchdowns, played clean football, no interceptions, 206 yards, I want to say. They need to run the ball well. And you can do that on this Rams team. If you look at that game against the Falcons, you and I had talked about this, like, the Rams were 7.5-point favorites. It felt like they would just crush the Falcons unless Bijan went off. And then Bijan went for 22 carries for 195 yards and a touchdown. And that included a 93-yard touchdown run. You take that out, he still has 21 carries for 102 yards and no touchdowns. But, he chewed up that Rams defense. And, the reality is, if Carolina can get the running game going and Tet McMillan can play decent football, Carolina can hang in this. I don't know that they're going to win it. I know that they can win it. And you've mentioned this. The last 3 times we've had an upside down division winner, they've won in the first round. Like, they can definitely do it.
2 of those, by the way, were NFC South winners.
Indeed. But I think, the key is going to be, can they get Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard in the running game going?
Now, the other thing is, since Puka Nakua's comments on the refs, the Rams have been in a downward spiral and have really struggled. And so I
Do
may
you
not.
really think that's connected?
Well, what I was going to say is I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious, and maybe that might come to haunt them. No, I don't think that's actually connected, but I think it will really come down to the run game, like you said, and then, if Tet McMillan, who is the presumable or the presumptive offensive rookie of the year winner, can make some big catches and kind of show out why Vegas thinks he is the runaway winner. Um, that puts the Rams in a really uncomfortable place, especially if they get down early and have to abandon kind of their balanced attack between Kyron Williams and Blake Corum, and then their passing attack behind Stafford and their two aces. If you're a Ted Lasso fan, in Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua.
Yeah, and I fully expect that Devontae Adams will be back and will be playing at a high level for this one. I think, it obviously was something that he sat out at all because he's been a bit of an Iron Man over the years. But I think it would take a lot for him to miss, the playoffs in this playoff run with this Rams team. So, okay, we both agree that the Rams are very potent. They are going to bring a lot of firepower to the table, and the Panthers are going to have to really focus on establishing the run if they're going to slow the game down, limit possessions, and compete in this one. I don't think they win another 31-28 game. I think they need to keep it a little bit lower scoring. But all of that said, it's a 10.5-point spread. Which way do you lean?
10.5 is so much for a home playoff team to give up. And we mentioned the sub 500 NFL playoff teams that have won games. And if you look at them, there's a reason for each of them. You look back at Beastquake and the fact that Marshawn was picked up in the midseason and then the Seahawks went on a run and really found themselves, kind of reminiscent of when Memphis was the 8th seed and they were able to knock off the Spurs, and they made a couple trades at the deadline and then made this push. And so that's one that, yes, the Saints were the defending champions, but Marshawn was Marshawn, and that was kind of the birth of him behind an incredible offensive line. You then move on to Carolina in, I want to say, 2014. It was the same year the Ducks played Florida State in the Rose Bowl. We stopped in Reno, and I lost money on that game. And I think they were starting Drew Skelton, because Carson Palmer had been knocked out. The Cardinals were leading the NFC West the entire year, and then they lost their quarterback with 3 weeks to go, and then they just fell apart. And so Carolina and Cam Newton at 7-9, got to feast on just a wingless bird in Carolina that year. And then this last one was, 2023, Baker Mayfield taking the Bucs to a 7-9 season, and then ultimately they got to nip down the Eagles that just free fell after starting 9-1, 9-2, and they lost 7 straight games to close out the season, and they just fell apart. This is very different because the Rams are none of those teams. The Rams are still viewed as the best team in football. They're still huge I don't know if they're the favorites to win the Super Bowl, but they're, one of the top 3. And so it's one of those things where I think Carolina is going to be hard pressed, but I'm not going to bet against history. I'm not going to bet against statistics. And like I just said, I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious. Give me the Panthers plus 10.5, although I think they lose the game.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm going to take the Panthers plus 10.5. Just for your edification, the Seahawks right now are the favorite to win the Super Bowl at plus 330 odds. The Rams are second at plus 425, followed by the Broncos at 650, and the Patriots at 9-1. So
nuts to me that the Broncos are the top AFC team there. I know they're the 1 seed. It just
It is a testament to how wide open the AFC is, and so that they're just giving it to the person in pole position. We've seen this in F1 before, where they're like, I don't know who it's going to be, so we just give it to the person who's starting in first. So, all right, we're both aligned on that. Panthers plus 10.5. I was going to say, I went back and looked at several years of Rams playoff runs, and when they start in the wild card round, they have had double-digit wins several times, never on the road. Over the last 15 years, those wins have always come at home. When they play on the road, they tend to play pretty close games, whether they win them or lose them. And so I expect that will be, more or less the same here. If they win by 7 or 8 points, is that going to feel like a close game? Maybe not, but that's still a cover at 10.5. So
Now, before we move on, I sent this to you, but obviously you know now. Sean McVay has coached 14 games in the playoffs. He has never faced the same team twice. That includes Carolina this upcoming week. And if somehow they traveled to Chicago, if they got past Carolina, that trend would continue, which is just absurd.
That really is. And I would love to do just a little bit of research. Maybe our buddy Jerry Gemini can help us. Is that unprecedented? Is it lightly precedented? Is it more precedented than we realize? Getting to the playoffs is not an easy thing. So just the fact that he has racked up 14 playoff games is, a huge credit to him as a coach and the career that he has built. But I would be really interested to know more on that. That is wild. Every single time facing a different logo, collecting a different scalp. I mean, it's one thing to beat everybody in the NFL. It's another thing to start beating everybody in the playoffs. So. And
Indeed.
actually, he's been in the NFC the whole time, right?
As a head coach.
Outside of a couple of Super Bowls, he's played most of the NFC in the playoffs then.
Yeah.
Because there are only 16 NFC teams. He's one of them. They played in 2 Super Bowls, 3 Super Bowls.
Two Super Bowls.
So
Patriots and the Bengals.
Right. So that means that now you're down to 16, down to 15, 14, 13, that there are only 13 teams that he could play in the NFC, right?
The Panthers, the Bears, and I believe the last one is the Cardinals.
Wow. That's wild. All right. Speaking of the Bears have what is now going to be the rowdiest home game in Soldier Field history. We said that ahead of their second matchup with the Packers. Now we're treated to a third. Sounds like Jordan Love's going to be back. They should have most of their weapons back. Obviously, no Tucker Kraft for the rest of the year. And the big thing is no Micah Parsons. In the first matchup, Micah Parsons played. The Packers won by 7. Just covering the 6.5-point spread. And a lot of us thought, well, I guess the Bears are good, not great this year. 2 weeks later, they meet again. And the Bears beat the Packers. And even though it was a close game, it felt like a very legitimate win. Like it was a competitive game, but it felt like the Bears controlled that game. And now you have this third matchup in Soldier Field. It's a 5:00 game. West Coast. It's going to be 7 p.m. It's going to be cold, dark, windy. That is going to be a wild environment for the Packers to walk into. And even though Aaron Rodgers doesn't play for the Packers anymore, his crimes against Bear humanity are remembered. And I think Chicago fans just want to destroy the Packers.
They do. The major problem is, even though this is a patchwork Packers team, we saw in Chicago a limited Packers team was able to go toe-to-toe, with them. That was an overtime game, even though Malik Willis played. And hey, the other thing, Malik Willis, he might be a starting NFL quarterback next year. He's played really well, even though they've lost some games. I'm not saying he'll start 17 games next year, but I could see a world where he is the starter for a team like, I don't know, Indianapolis, and he starts 4 or 5 games as they figure out what they're going to do. Like, I think he's played himself into some money this year. He looked really good against Baltimore. He was not the reason they lost that game. But you're right. Jordan Love's going to be back. This is going to be one of those games where, hey, as a Seahawks fan, I am rooting for the Bears or for the Packers because I would much rather have Green Bay come to town than either the Niners or the
Rams.
The Rams. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm kind of landing. This is a division game. It is hard to win in January. It's even harder to win against your division rivals that know you so well. And each of these games came down to the freaking wire. So I'm looking forward to it.
They did. Now, I thought that this would open up probably Chicago -2 or Chicago -2.5. Not the full 3 that you normally see for a home team when two teams are evenly matched. But it didn't do that. It opened at Packers -1.5, and there it has sat since it opened. It's a little wild to me that the Packers are a favorite here, and I say that knowing that Vegas doesn't do pick'ems anymore. So this is the modern pick'em, -1.5, and as you and I have talked about, it'll flip back and forth throughout the week as money comes in on either side to try and keep it about even. Packers -1.5. This is the first game that I really like. I like the Bears here. I think the Bears are going to be able to run the football on the Packers. I think Caleb Williams is going to be ready for this game. Really, I believe in Ben Johnson so much more than I believe in Matt LaFleur. And I think the Bears have had a couple of letdowns this year in moments that aren't exactly shocking. They lost that game to the Ravens, but they won 4 before it and 5 after it. Like, you're going to lose one eventually, and the Ravens, have some talent. Yes, it was Tyler Huntley, yada, yada, but Tyler Huntley's not a terrible backup quarterback. They lost that game to Detroit early in the year, and that was a real sense check game for them. And I believe that Ben Johnson turned that into fuel for their fire. But Green Bay has lost games that you're just like, what are you doing? And they've won games where it was like, wow, I'm actually almost surprised that they won that game. And that's happened too often for me in a coin flip game like this to think that Matt LaFleur is going to go into Chicago without his best player and perhaps one of the 3 or 4 best players in the entire league in Micah Parsons and win this game. I just don't see it.
What I really struggle with on the Chicago side is this is Caleb Williams' first postseason game in the NFL, and he's played in some bowl games in USC, and that's great, but the bowl system doesn't matter anymore. He didn't actually play in the playoffs, and it's not like he played in a Rose Bowl or anything. And then this is also Ben Johnson's first game in the playoffs as a head coach, and I do believe that matters. Now, the flip side of it is, hey, who's Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love beaten in the playoffs? They have one playoff win between the two of them, and this is a Jordan Love guy that we crowned as the next big thing. And they beat a Cowboys team that I felt was a little overrated, and they beat them by basically taking away CeeDee Lamb, and then that was kind of it. They then went and had a huge lead on the Niners when the Niners were the 1 seed and went to the Super Bowl and blew it. And they could not close the game out. So I am not a huge believer. And then
last year they lost at Philadelphia, and they got beat pretty handily, 22-10. So yeah, I mean, Jordan Love is 1-2, and he hasn't done anything that made me go, wow, man, you know what? He's had some tough luck, but he's really the next coming. I haven't seen that.
I don't believe it. I don't understand why the media wants to put him in that same realm of Green Bay quarterback where after that Cowboys game, the media kept saying, how did they do it again? And it's like, do not compare this guy to Bart Starr, Brett Favre, and Aaron Rodgers. Like, that is an insult to those 3 players, especially it's his second year. He's won 1 playoff game. Let's give him some space. And then the other thing, did you know that if we still only had 6 teams in the playoffs, Green Bay would be on a 4-year stretch of missing the playoffs? It's not like he's been playing lights out and he's earned this reputation and has a 1 seed. Aaron Rodgers, his first year starting.
Wait. What do you mean a 4-year stretch of missing the playoffs?
I mean, the Packers missed the playoffs in Aaron Rodgers' final year there, thanks to Dan Campbell knocking him out. And then they were the 7th seed 3 years in a row. They barely squeaked in.
I see what you're saying, 100%. Yeah, so they've been saved by that expansion.
Exactly. And we've had years where
think of them as like a perennial playoff team and one of those, perennial Super Bowl contenders. But to your point, not quite that.
And so that's where I'm coming at it from I'm a big believer in Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams. And look, when the spotlight is on and crunch time is on, and yeah, we've seen some first halves where Caleb has struggled. When it's time to dial it in, he's there with ice water in his veins. And that last throw in Chicago on, late December, right before Christmas against Green Bay, whew, he knew it as soon as he let the ball go. I think it was a 50-yard touchdown. And it was just this cathartic moment for Bears fans. Now, can they get it again? I certainly think they can. That's where I'm putting my money, and that's where I think this game is going to wind up. I think it'll be
I agree.
close.
I agree. My money is on the Bears -1.5. And if I like any player prop, I like Jordan Love plus one plus interception. And I would even put some money on 2+ interceptions because the Bears led the league this year in takeaways with 33 total takeaways. They also led the league with 23 interceptions. They love to take the ball away. They will bend. They will invite you to throw the ball, and then they will ball hawk like nobody's business and take it away. I think Jordan Love coming back a little bit rusty. I think he's going to throw a couple to the Bears. I think there's going to be a lot of noise. He's going to struggle with that. So, yeah, I like the Bears -1.5. Maybe you parlay that with 1+ pick. Maybe you parlay that and get a little bit greedy and go 2+ picks, which would be a tall order for the Chicago defense. But if anybody can get that done this weekend, it's the Bears defense.
And the last thing I'll leave you with, it's really hard to make the playoffs. It's really, really hard to host playoff games. If you're Chicago fans, you don't know how many more of these you're going to get in Chicago before they move to Indiana and they're the Gare Bears.
That's a shot fired. We'll see if they actually move. But, yeah, it'll be interesting. All right, so we're both on Chicago. We were both on the Panthers. We have yet to disagree. This third game might be the one that incites a little bit of disagreement. It is the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen, and his not injured foot, maybe injured foot, heading to Jacksonville to take on Trevor Lawrence and Liam Cohen and the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Buffalo is also a 1.5-point favorite on the road. John, I think that's wrong.
I don't understand how Buffalo is favored in this game. Now, I understand Vegas is trying to get 50% on both sides. They want to take their rake and guarantee a profit. And people see this and say, well, it's Jacksonville in the playoffs. Like, ew. And for a casual bettor, sure, they're thinking that. For anybody who watches football more than casually, you're seeing this invigorated passing attack behind Trevor Lawrence, who's been transcendent this year in Liam Cohen's offense. And then Jacoby Myers come in, and he's been a skeleton key that's really unlocked us in a way that didn't seem feasible when they traded away, some mid-round picks for him in an already loaded, receiving room, especially when you count Brenton Strange. Now, the flip side of it is they don't have Josh Allen. And Josh Allen is a freaking alien specimen superhero that has taken over games time and time again this year, even going back to week 1. And you can just never count that guy out. And look, if Joey Bosa can make 2 big critical plays in what I expect to be a shootout, that could turn the tide.
Yeah, I suppose. I look at this Jacksonville team, and I think first actually about Travis Etienne. And I think about how strong the running game has been all year. The offensive line has won in the trenches, and this Bills defense has just not been great. They gave up 24 points in a loss at Atlanta. They gave up 30 points in a loss at Miami. They gave up 23 points in a loss at Houston. I can't help but think about the New England game where they were down 21-0 and then 24-7 at half. I think against Jacksonville, they're not going to come back from that. You can say what you want about Trevor Lawrence. I've said a lot about Trevor Lawrence. A lot. And not a lot of it nice. But he is a high pedigree quarterback. This is his 5th year in the league. He's having a breakthrough. And he's not shell-shocked by anything. There's nothing bad that can be said about him that is going to shake him. It's all been said. It's like he's playing with house money at this point. So I don't think the moment is really going to... It's not like he's never been to the playoffs. He has. Like when we talk about Drake May, and we'll talk about him a little bit more in a minute, and one of my big things is I like New England. I just don't believe that a player can win the conference in their first rodeo in the playoffs altogether. I think you need a taste of that. I tried to go back and find a quarterback who did it, and I couldn't.
Really, only Dan Marino, and he didn't even win the Super Bowl.
Exactly. And then never made it back to the Super Bowl. And, for me, when I look at what Trevor Lawrence is doing, and you brought up Jacoby Myers, Who would have thought that the addition of Jacoby Myers would have unlocked Brian Thomas Jr. the way that it has? I think actually the attention that Jacoby Myers, and credit Parker Washington, who just kept showing up in the stat sheet all year. 4 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown, or 2 touchdowns and a punt return touchdown. But he has dudes around him everywhere. And Travis Hunter still isn't even back, and it doesn't matter. But I think you're right that Jacoby Myers was that skeleton key, that once he was put in place in the temple wall, all of a sudden everything started moving and going into place. And now I look at this Bills defense and I'm just like, I'm sorry. How is this defense going to stop this offense? I feel like everybody is sleeping on this Jacksonville offense just because it's Jacksonville, and we're used to making jokes about Jacksonville and all of that. But like, dude, I've watched them a bunch. You've watched them a bunch.
How do you sleep on a team that won 13 games? That's the insane thing to me.
Because the NFL is a sport. As much as data has become an integral part of how we consume the sport, consider the sport, discuss the sport, the NFL is an emotional game. And you hear it from people all the time, like, yeah, I know what the data says. I just don't buy it. Right? There are a lot, and that is built up over time. If the Jets somehow came out next year and started 12-0, you'd have so many people that were like, no, they're going to miss the playoffs. They're 12-0, they'll probably still miss the playoffs. Right? Like, that is just the NFL. And I think that that's the only reason why. This reminds me of Indiana, Alabama last week, where Indiana was a 7-point favorite. And I talked about this with you. I wrote about this. When you looked at all of the matchups, it made no sense that Indiana was anything less than a 13.5-point favorite. Alabama, completely one-dimensional team. They were 120th in rushing in the NCAAs. Like, had lost a bunch of games, just got stomped by Georgia, and arguably Indiana had a better defense, proved to be a much better defense. It was just reputation. And there's so much reputation around Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills, and that's the only reason why he's a 1.5-point favorite. It doesn't actually make sense, especially when you consider, outside of Josh Allen, who is the one player who matters on the Bills offense?
James Cook, maybe?
Yeah, yes, James Cook.
I'm having a real hard time thinking who their other superstar is, to your point.
Now, this might surprise you. James Cook did win the rushing title. He ended up having the most rushing yards in the league, which was kind of quiet this year. So he does. He relies on James Cook. But who's a top 5 rushing defense? The Jacksonville Jaguars. That's what they want to do. They want to eat up space. They want to shut down guys like James Cook. The linebackers are fast, and they fly east to west. That makes it hard for Cook to run in that outside zone game, and it's going to come down to Josh Allen. And is he going to be able to put on his cape and play superhero and win that game? And the difference between the Josh Allen I think that we're going to see on Sunday and the Josh Allen that put on the cape against New England, put on the cape against Cincinnati, put on the cape against Tampa, put on the cape against Kansas City, that Josh Allen had 10 healthy toes and 2 healthy footsies. And it's really easy to shift around in the pocket, to push off from weird angles and get that thrust into the ball that he is known for, to get outside the pocket and not just rumble for a yard, but run for a 40-yard touchdown. That's what makes him so special, right? That he does what he does at his size. All of a sudden, you hurt a foot, you're 70% of yourself with no talent around you, in a running game that is likely going to face an uphill battle. That's scary. I'm going to call it right now. I'm going to put $20 on Jacksonville minus 13.5 in this game.
13.5? Bold. I just don't see Josh Allen getting blown out like that.
We are going to see sad Josh Allen face on the sidelines. And it's going to be, if you believe in this stuff being scripted, That's the script, right? The year that
The
Mahomes is
year it was
out,
wide open.
Burrow's out, Jackson's out. Everybody said it's Allen's, and then he can't win the AFC East, and everybody makes excuses and says, "Oh, but it doesn't matter. He's the best quarterback in the playoffs," and then can't overcome a foot injury. And then we all look back on it and we say, "Oh, what a tough year, man. The door was open for him, but he had that foot injury."
That was his shot. Now, the only other aspect is Liam Cohen is also a first-year head coach. Does that come back to bite him? But, you also look at what Tampa's offense has turned into after losing Liam Cohen, and it shows that he was the juice there.
100%. And I think if you're asking the question, does that rear its head when considering whether Jacksonville can get to and win the Super Bowl? The answer is probably yes. That you've got to go through 3 rounds to win the Super Bowl.
4
3
rounds.
rounds and then the Super Bowl, right? But we're talking about round 1. We're talking about winning 1 game. Do I think he's going to crap his pants this weekend over the fact that he's finally coaching a playoff game as a head coach? I don't. They've seemed unfazed by the noise this year, by the doubts and the skepticism, and just unfazed. And I think that that's the mindset that they have, is nobody believes in us. And you've heard Bill Simmons talk about it, but it's true. Nobody believes in us as a mantra is perhaps the most powerful mantra in sports. And Jacksonville has to feel that in fucking spades. And when you're really, really good, do you remember nobody believes in us? Seattle Seahawks in New York playing the Denver Broncos, who were so good, and Peyton Manning and Demaryius Thomas, and oh my God, the Broncos are so good. They're the number 1 offense, and yeah, the Seahawks are the number 1 defense, but I mean, the Broncos. Nobody believed in us. And nobody took that to heart more than Richard Sherman. I think Jacksonville is going to embody that. And I think that spells bad news for Buffalo this weekend.
I think we're in for a hell of a game, and I just can't wait to see it.
So you think it's going to be close?
I do. For Josh Allen to have his heart broken in the way that you are describing from a script writing perspective, it's got to be close. It's got to be a failed 4th down with 3 minutes left on the game, and then Jacksonville's going to go convert a 1st down to ice it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen enough Bills playoffs football to know that sometimes it is close and miserable, and other times it's a blowout. So it could go either way. This will be a fun one. My money's going to be on Jacksonville -1.5 or +1.5 either way. Actually, I won't bet the +1.5. I'm a sucker. I'm just going to bet the money line and take the extra little bit of juice. And it sounds like you are also on Jacksonville, or you're on Buffalo. Because you do have to pick.
I'm going to bet with my heart. I'm going to go with the Bills.
All right, we diverge.
Yeah.
Finally. We'll see how this one goes. Do you want to put a steak dinner on it?
I'll make you chicken wings.
Okay. All right. Next game, middle of the day on Saturday. For my money, this might be the game of the week. The San Francisco 49ers coming off of that tough loss to Seattle at home, losing out on the 1 seed, and as we were reminded over and over and over, the opportunity to not have to get on an airplane again for the rest of the playoffs because the Super Bowl is also in Santa Clara, yada, yada, yada. Well, fuck you 49ers. You didn't get the job done, so you do have to get on an airplane, and you are going to the happiest place on earth. No, not Disneyland. You are going to Philadelphia. And the Philadelphia Eagles fans are not happy. They're not happy with their own team, which means they're just disgruntled in general, and that should make for a very, very tense environment on Saturday. The Eagles are 4.5-point favorites. You and I were both surprised at this. Why are you surprised?
Because Kyle Shanahan has shown that no matter how good your defense is, when he has Trent Williams and Ricky Pearsall playing, he finds a way to score points. You look at what he did to Indianapolis. You look at what he's done to other teams throughout the year. Kyle Shanahan is just, he's a cut above, and I don't believe in Nick Sirianni. So the fact that it's not a 2.5 point favorite, saying that you think they're evenly, it's a 4.5 point, more than a field goal game with an Eagles team that has struggled to move the ball at times because they don't know whether they want to run this week or pass this week, and they're just listening to who's screaming loudest about not getting enough touches. Like, I'm not bought in on this Eagles team being that much of a dominant winner against the Niners.
I think, if anything, the Seattle game shook this line more than any other line this week. I think, which is to say that of the wild card games, if the Seattle game had been 27-24 Seahawks and Seattle hadn't just completely dominated the 49ers offense, and if the 49ers defense maybe wasn't so porous against the run, it would be harder for Vegas to look at the Eagles and go, if the Seahawks can do that, the Eagles can do that. And really, in theory, they should be able to. They have Lane Johnson back on offense. They should be able to run the ball well with Saquon Barkley, even if they're not running it like they did last year, and they are not. I fully recognize that. But they still should be able to establish the running game. They should be able to run all the different routes in the route trees. The 49ers defensive backs are not scary. They should be able to score, right? We know they can get those first downs when it's, 4th and 1. So, look, if the Eagles don't cover the 4.5, I think Vegas looks at it as they shoot themselves in the foot, because that's why we're at 4.5, right? If Vegas really believed in the Eagles, they would be 6.5 point favorites at home. If they were really like, that's who San Francisco is, it'd be a 6.5 point game. On the other hand, if they really believed in San Francisco and said, hey, that game was an anomaly and we're not so sure about the Eagles, this would be a 1.5, 2.5 point game. So to me, reading between the lines, that says they believe if the Eagles come out and play anything close to their game at home, they should beat the 49ers by a touchdown or more. If the Eagles shoot themselves in the foot again, like they have for a quarter at a time, a half at a time, whole games at a time, this game will be closer than people think. I'm going to take the 49ers. I'm going to take the 49ers plus 4.5 because I just think there are too many different ways this game can go. And to your point, I trust Kyle Shanahan way more than I trust Nick Sirianni and that offensive coaching staff, Joe Patullo and team. So, it could blow up in our face. This could absolutely be an Eagles 24-13 game. It could, but I think it's going to be a game that the 49ers keep close. Give me Eagles 17-14.
I think that's fair. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think the Niners will struggle to run the ball against this defensive front. I think Saquon will get going, and 4.5 is just so many points. It's tough. We have a 3 p.m. basketball game we're going to, my kid's first Blazer game, but the game kicks off at 1:30, so I've had to explain to Nolan that we'll watch on the phone while we are in the Moda Center, and thank God for modern 5G that we can do that.
Amen, man. We did that last time we were at the Blazer game. We had another game going on the phone, and it didn't used to be that way, as you mentioned. You used to walk into an arena and your phone just went dead, essentially. Yeah, just a brick.
So give me the Niners.
Okay. All right, so now we agree on everything except for Bills-Jaguars. We've got 2 games left. If Bills or if 49ers-Eagles isn't the most appealing game of the week to me, it is Chargers-Patriots. I am so fascinated by this one. You have Jim Harbaugh going into New England with a seasoned quarterback in Justin Herbert, who has played really well this year. He has really struggled behind an offensive line that has not been healthy. He hasn't struggled. The offensive line has struggled to stay healthy, which has made life harder for Justin Herbert. It's made life harder for the running game. But now they've got Amari Hampton back. They've got Kamari Vidal. So they've got a pretty decent 1-2 punch. They've got Keenan Allen. They've got Quentin Johnson. They've got Ladd McConkey. They've got maybe my favorite tight end in the whole league in Omari Gadsden. They have a very good offense. And I think the Patriots obviously been pretty banged up on defense. And I don't think they're scared of the Patriots defense at all. I think especially when you look at what Josh Allen and the Bills did to the Patriots in Foxborough. And when you look at what the Chargers went and did to the Jaguars in Jacksonville, I think the Chargers believe they can play with anybody. And I think defensively, we've talked about Houston's the best defense in the league, and then right behind Houston, you have Seattle. The Chargers aren't that far off. The Chargers have a really good defense, and they are going to make life difficult for Drake May in his first playoff start.
I also am with you where Herbert has just gotten the crap kicked out of him for 4 quarters, week after week after week after week, to the point where he is so dazed after games he doesn't want to talk to the sideline reporter and have the post-game press conference. He wants to just go celebrate with his team after getting big dubs. This seems like a chance where, hey, maybe he won't get, the ever-loving stuffing knocked out of him for 4 quarters, and he's going to have a little more time than normal to actually play football and not have to be Superman. I love Justin Herbert. He reminds me a lot of Josh Allen, except without all of the playoff appearances, because he's played for, they actually have both played for cursed franchises. The X factor here is Jim Harbaugh, who comes in with a mindset, comes in with players believing in him, and is able to turn around franchises very quickly, and then leads those defenses. The other side of it is, hey, Mike Vrabel, you've had 1 seeds in the past. You've had a couple big playoff wins, but you've never been able to actually get it done and get it over the line. And they have not faced the gauntlet that is the AFC West, where you look at who they've beaten in the Pats, and that schedule is not a strong one.
Easiest schedule in 25 years when you look at winning percentage and all the different ways that they chop up your strength of record and your strength of schedule and strength of opponent and all those things. It's the easiest in 25 years, like historically easy. It's not going to be easy from here.
No, especially starting off against Jim Harbaugh in this defense. I wouldn't be surprised if, this is a first round exit for the Pats and the Chargers just get it done in a slugfest. 13-10, 13-7, something low scoring like that, where it's just trading haymakers back and forth.
So I actually really like the under 2. Did you know the spread is New England minus 3.5 and the total is 46.5? I think this would be a prime candidate for a 6-point same game parlay teaser, where you take the Chargers at plus 3.5, and then you get them to 9.5, and then you take the total from 46.5 to 52.5, and you get the under on that. And I bet you'd get that at about even money. And I would really like that. I don't think there's any chance the Patriots blow the Chargers out this weekend. I really don't see that. And I think to your point, like even if there is a bit of scoring, I don't think it's a high scoring game. I think maybe it gets into the low 20s, but I don't see it going past that. But yeah, I really like the Chargers in this one. I think the other play that I would find interesting would be playing with the alternative lines and looking at Chargers minus 2.5 or even Chargers minus 3.5. Because you're going to get some really good value on that. Starting from plus 3.5 at minus 110, you're probably going to see them at plus 250 to plus 300, I would guess, in the minus 2.5, minus 3.5 camp. And if you think this is a close game, call it a tie game to start the fourth quarter. There are plenty of ways that it plays out, that the Patriots kick a field goal and then the Chargers score a touchdown, win the game over, win by 4. And covers either of those 2 scenarios. So this is the one that I am most excited about from a betting perspective. I definitely am going to bet the Jaguars. I am probably going to bet the Bears. But I am certainly going to bet the Chargers in a couple of different ways in this one.
I'm just excited to see some good football. This is the first playoffs I can remember that wild card weekend has been bangers from start to finish, and there hasn't been just a dud game.
No, there really hasn't. So, speaking of a dud game, we could have a little bit of a dud game on Monday night. You talked about how the Texans were no longer like the skinniest kid at fat camp. You're at the early morning Saturday slot, or the early afternoon Saturday slot. Now they're playing the last game of the week on Monday Night Football. They're a 3-point favorite heading into Pittsburgh. I'm really surprised by this. I thought that Houston would be more than a 3-point favorite. There's no question that they have the better defense. They have the best defense in the league. They have the lowest points allowed in the entire league. The Steelers have won a bunch of games. They haven't won a bunch of games at all. They've won multiple games that I really didn't think they were the better team. They've only lost a couple of games where I thought, well, they really should have won that. This feels like Texans all the way to me. What am I missing?
Mike Tomlin, during the regular season, does his weird voodoo magic Mike Tomlin stuff to win those games that he shouldn't be winning. TJ Watt is a game wrecker that could have a few really big plays, but I think it really comes down to that Pittsburgh defensive front that could give CJ Stroud and their running game fits. And look, the running game for the Texans hasn't been super strong all year. They never got Joe Mixon back. Nick Chubb was in and out, and he's played really well for a guy who's had multiple knee blowouts. Woody Marks has been a pretty good rookie, but he hasn't really lit the world on fire. And they could struggle. I could see this game, like the under at 39.5 is still not low enough for me. Like, I think that is something you bet the under on, because I think both of these offenses are really going to struggle to score. And if it is a 10-3 or a 10-6 or a 7-6 game in the fourth quarter, well, I know he's old, and I know that this could be his last game in his career, and he could ride off into the sunset after this, and he probably is going to ride off into the sunset after the season. But who do you bank on in the playoffs in that scenario? Do you bank on Aaron Rodgers to go down and win a game, or do you bank on CJ Stroud, who I think Stroud has one playoff win underneath his belt right now? So
yeah. I was having this conversation with my buddy Graham, and he's obviously a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and he was selling me on all the reasons why the Steelers could potentially steal this game. And you hit on a lot of them. Make it a, real, what did I say?
You said the Steelers could steal this game.
Oh, boy. That was a pun unintended. But it really is about keeping it low scoring, getting a couple of big plays. Houston has played really good defense this year, but they have, in the last couple of weeks, given up a couple of big plays. I just don't see it. I'm all over Texans -3 here. And I think this is a game that has real blowout potential, and sending Aaron Rodgers out on a really sour note. I think Derek Stingley is going to take DK Metcalf out of this game. And without DK Metcalf, we have seen that the Steelers have very little offense. Like last week, it was Adam Thielen. I'm sorry. We think Adam Thielen's going to have his resurgence continue against the Texans? No. I don't see this. I don't see this. I think it's going to be Texans. I'm not even sure about that total, because I could see this being Texans 27, Steelers 13, Steelers 17, something like that.
I just feel like Aaron Rodgers is going to have a second and a half to get rid of the ball before that defensive front from the Texans is in his lap every single play. And it's an interesting thing. The Seahawks defense is really, really good because they changed their game plan and they changed their personnel based on what's in front of them. They're a tactical minded team that really caters to the scheme. That's not the Texans. The Texans do their thing really well, and you can't stop it. They're going to run their defense, and they're going to run it down your throat, and you cannot stop it because their players are that much better than yours. And I think we're going to see that for 60 minutes this weekend on Monday, or not this weekend, but 60 minutes on Monday night. And Rodgers is going to be just having the crap kicked out of him. He may not give up a bunch of sacks because he's really good at getting the ball out quick, but it's also hard to move the ball when your receivers can't even get off the line of scrimmage before it's in the air.
100%. 100%. All right. So I'm on Houston. You're on Houston?
Houston, and give me the under. I may parlay those things.
All right. All right. Well, John, that's all we've got for Wild Card Weekend. Thank you for making the time to chop it all up. And then, as we discussed, next week, let's come back together and let's each have our rankings from 8 to 1 in terms of the least bleak to the most bleak outlooks if you are a fan of one of these teams. And let's be prepared to talk about rosters. Let's talk about salary cap. Let's talk about coaches. Let's just talk about history, divisions. There are a lot of things to consider when we look at where each one of these franchises sits. But first, we've got a lot of football to watch. We've got a lot of bets to make. This is going to be a very fun weekend. Can't wait to get into it.
Can't wait.
Chat soon, brother.
See ya.